Hi, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thanks for joining myself as well as a couple of esteemed guests here for this IPA talk. Today with me, I've got Deputy Executive Director / General Counsel Brian Schwartz, as well as Government Public Relations Director Allison Maley, here to talk about a few important items. One of those was what occurred during this last lame duck session that we just had, a little preview of what we could expect here during the spring session, and a few other odds and ends we'll toss in there as well. So, Brian and Allison, thanks as always for taking some time to give us some updates of a legislative and legal nature.
Absolutely.
Sure.
All right, so Allison, let's start with you. Had some big things happening downtown, though they were still in pandemic mode, I guess is maybe the right way to describe it, where the Senate was meeting at the Capitol, the House was meeting at the Bank of Springfield Center, also known as the Boss Center, downtown in Springfield. So can you just share with us a little bit about what occurred? Because there was actually some pretty significant things.
Yeah. So of course, we definitely had a change in leadership, which we'll talk about in a moment. That's pretty momentous. But of course, the Legislative Black Caucus agenda really, I think, took most of the center stage for what action occurred in terms of legislation. So they had 4 pillars, and the pillars address things like education and workforce development, criminal justice reform, economic equity, and healthcare and human services issues. So of course, we were primarily looking at the education and workforce development pillar and the legislation that went with it. So the final bill was House Bill 2170. There were a series of amendments. Senate Amendment 3 is what became the final bill. So in the process of that, lots of things were added in the first time and then taken out later on. So I guess we can kind of talk about what's in the final package, and then we can kind of mention what was taken out amidst some last minute negotiating and some talking with legislators amongst themselves and with other advocates. So it's a big bill. It ended up being, I think, close to around 200, 300 pages of the final product, which started out, I think, around 500 or so to start with. But I think probably the biggest things are for our folks, looking at curriculum and assessments, codifying the kids' assessment. I think, people have been doing this, so it may not be that big of a stretch to codify it in state law, but it's something that has been put into that bill. So codifying the kids' assessment, the kindergarten assessment. Of course, new graduation requirements. So I know a lot of people have been talking about this. Beginning with the 2028-2029 school year, requiring 2 years of foreign language. So just to kind of back up a bit, so a lot of these graduation requirements are aimed at making sure that students have what they need before they leave high school in order to gain admission to not just Illinois flagship universities, all of our state universities, but also universities elsewhere. So trying to kind of align what students are doing in high school with what they're going to be required to have to be able to, step foot in the door when they get to higher ed. So again, we're a little, we're quite a bit far out from this requirement being mandated just yet, but obviously, we'll be keeping an eye on it and making sure that, there's licensure flexibility and the things that we would need for schools to be able to commit to 2 years of foreign language by 2028.
And Allison, I think, aren't we just sorry to interrupt here, but aren't we also looking at the professional review panel that takes a look at evidence-based funding formula? They're also being tasked with looking at some of the fiscal feasibility of some of these things, including graduation requirement changes, correct?
Yeah, and especially for foreign language, there's been bills last couple of years about requiring a foreign language for all students at all levels. So, starting with, early elementary, requiring Spanish or something like that. So the PRP would be tasked with looking at what that would look like in addition to what would be required for, meeting this requirement later on down the road. Beyond that, so changing our science requirements, so rather than just a 2 years of science in quotes, by 2024, requiring 2 years of a laboratory science. So just kind of making that tweak to it and making sure that those classes meet that laboratory science definition. Starting with the 22-23 school year, students in grades 9 through 12 would have to have a course that includes intensive instruction in computer literacy. So that it sounds maybe like a lot, but I think it's pretty flexible the way it's written. It could include anything from English to social studies or any other subject that might touch on computer literacy. I think we can maybe expect a definition or maybe some clarification about what that means. But I guess you could argue, I mean, my 5-year-old is on Zoom every day, so that would make him computer literate, I guess, in some cases. So if that counts, then that counts. So that may not be that big of a deal at the end of the day. Later on, let's see, looking at, again, with computer science, requiring school districts to ensure that students receive developmentally appropriate opportunities to gain those computer literacy skills. So again, not necessarily learning how to code right away, but just knowing how to work a computer, knowing how to use, Zoom, these types of tools, making sure that students know how to be computer literate for the long haul. Starting with the 2023-24 school year, requiring districts to provide an opportunity for students to take at least one computer science course. So kind of, we've got computer literacy on one hand and computer science on the other. But it would require schools to at least make that offering to students. It would not be a graduation requirement, but it requires districts to at least make that offering available.
And Allison, just to be clear, the new mandates that are graduation requirements, they would actually be phased in. So for the ones that start in the 28-29 school year, that would be a graduation requirement for that year's entering freshmen.
Ninth graders, right?
Correct.
Right.
The other ones that are just course opportunities, like the one you just mentioned for computer science in grades 9 through 12, that would have to be offered in the year in which it goes into effect. In that case, the 23-24 school year.
That's right. That's right. In addition to that, so the state board is going to be looking at a review of social studies standards to make sure that they are inclusive and reflective of all individuals in this country, the racial and ethnic diversity of the state and the country. So we've had a Black History study task force already. So I think they'll be building upon the work of that group. And I believe that the state board is already working on a review of social studies standards to kind of make sure that they are all inclusive, all encompassing of the racial and ethnic diversity of our state and our country going forward. So that will be something that I think that we'll be looking at. I think we'll have a member, I would imagine, at some point to kind of help with the stakeholder input for that. So that's just kind of a review from the state board's perspective and a requirement for them to take a look at these standards. It also creates an inclusive American History Commission. So that would be more of a task force commission type nature. So those groups will also be looking at ensuring that instruction and content are not biased toward any specific cultures, time periods. Commission members include a teacher or several teachers, actually, a principal, school librarian, school board member, and a superintendent, along with other stakeholders. So that will be a work in progress as well. And then adds the history of the pre-enslavement of Black people, study of the reasons why Black people came to be enslaved, and the study of the American Civil Rights Renaissance to existing Black history curriculum. So adding those three pieces to what schools are already talking about when it comes to Black history curriculum. So those are probably the biggest curriculum issues. We can keep going. We have the Whole Child initiatives as well. So there's a creation of a Whole Child task force to look at training and restorative practices, implicit bias and responsive strategies for trauma-informed care, everything along those lines that we talk about all the time, with trying to make sure that kids' social and emotional needs are also met in schools. Those task force members include school administrators, a principal, and a school board member, along with, I think in total there are 30 members of that task force. They will be looking at, one of the things that they are charged with looking at is the role of school resource officers in schools, how much schools are spending on SROs. So I want to make it clear, there's no prohibition whatsoever, but I think that's something that task force and that commission will be looking at going forward, and just what is that role, and how are districts using those individuals.
I thought you did a great job summarizing all the provisions in your January 13th, 2021 advocacy.
That's what I'm reading through.
So anyone that's watching this webcast that wants more information can certainly see that document along with additional information that we'll be putting out as these requirements get phased into effect.
Well, let's talk about a big item that didn't make it through this lame duck session. Brian, I'll bat at your direction here, and that was dealing with timeout and restraint. We really expected to see some legislation that has been worked on for quite a while. Last spring, we thought we would see it in veto session. We didn't have a veto session. We expected to see him lame duck, and I think we were down to just a concurrence vote that was needed that we seemed to run out of time for. So would you just chat a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, timeout and restraint has been a moving target for quite some time now. And we thought we had a deal. We were close to a deal. House Bill 2263 was on concurrence in the House on a Senate amendment. And the House just simply ran out of time before session ended. So we will, I would say most definitely, Allison, correct me if I'm wrong, but most definitely see something similar to Senate Amendment 3 to House Bill 2263 in this new session. In the interim, it's important that school administrators default to the administrative rules that the State Board of Education passed, and that is only really allowing for timeout and restraint when a child's behavior presents an imminent danger, and then only allowing an adult to leave the timeout room where that adult is physically with the student if that student's behavior presents an imminent danger. A couple of things that are important to mention quickly. Imminent danger is not defined anywhere in the rules, so it's very important that school officials document how the child's behavior was an imminent danger at the time of the incident. The other thing that's important that went into effect with the administrative rules are new training requirements. Individuals who essentially deal with timeout and restraint, your crisis management team, your timeout room supervisors must have 8 hours of training annually. And that's caused a bit of a problem with the pandemic. A lot of the training can be done online, but any type of training that actually physically shows individuals how to do the restraints has to be done in person. That is a liability issue. That will be the first thing that a plaintiff's attorney will ask, whether or not an individual who assisted in timeout restraint was properly trained. So that's something that school officials should make sure their staff is fully trained in, at least those staff members that are on the crisis management team participate in timeout restraint.
So we know that the sponsors of the legislation were looking to codify much of what the state board had put into rule. Several of those things, obviously, we were supportive of, including, the prohibition of prone restraint, which is face down restraint. But one of the desires of the legislation also was to really push for, and this is what we still are going to have to work through in the spring session, but we were fine to where we were neutral on the bill, but the elimination of the use of these restraints or any type of restraints. And I think we got a sense from the Senate sponsor that it appeared that it was like trying to reduce use and minimize the use and looking at deploying any other type of appropriate strategy with kids, of course, to make sure nobody was getting hurt, but then not have to use any type of restraint or timeout and such, which I think we'd all would honestly would say we would be hopeful for, that we would never have to be in a situation to use this. But I would say as this does move into the spring session, which it ultimately will, the sponsors, both the House and the Senate, have made it pretty clear that they're going to continue to push for this legislation to get passed. And at some point in time down the road, we'll be interested in hearing for clarification around what that exactly means, which, again, I think we all have the ultimate goal that we have to use that, but we also want to be careful about any unintended consequences that could come to that, where we're talking about harm to kids or the use of methods that like calling in police, for example, to deal with kids that are having difficulty with their behavior. We sure don't want to get to that point either. So it's trying to strike the right balance with that. So thanks for the updates there. Let's pivot here a bit and start looking at the spring session and what's ahead. Allison, what do you think we've got to be looking at here as we start peering into what the spring may be? And maybe first and foremost, just to talk about how we got new leadership in the House, which
Yeah.
Has not happened for
So,
decades at this point.
no, almost 40 years just about. So I'm sure everyone has read the news by now. Speaker Madigan is no longer Speaker of the House. So we have a new speaker, Emmanuel Chris Welch, who is from the Westchester area of Illinois, up north. He is our new Speaker of the House. So it's a really momentous change, really a sea change in terms of the leadership, the first Black Speaker in Illinois. So a really historic moment for him and for really the General Assembly as a whole. So we work with Speaker. It's still it's still getting used to saying Speaker Welch, but we work with Speaker Welch several times on different pieces of legislation. I know he's been active in some charter school legislation that our friends at the School Board Association have worked on. We worked with him on student discipline legislation in the past. So I feel like we have a good working relationship with him and look forward to working with him further in this new role. So it was a bit of a kind of a, I don't know how to describe it, just kind of an interesting turn of events. Speaker Madigan withdrew his candidacy, or suspended his candidacy, I should say, as others were kind of coming forward. And I think ultimately, the House Black Caucus rallied around Speaker Welch, and others came around within the caucus to back him up. So really, really quite a momentous change going on.
Yeah. And Allison, interestingly, I was just going to point out that Speaker Welch is a former school board member,
Right.
and proviso, I believe, and also a school law attorney by training. So it will be certainly nice to have somebody in that role that has extensive school experience and really knows the issues.
Well, that'll be extremely helpful, and obviously, I'm sure to issues that are important to us, and sure congratulate now Speaker Welch in this exciting new position, and hope that this really affords great opportunities for him and the General Assembly now moving forward. But that's not the only place where we've had some changes in leadership. Correct, Allison? We had some on the House, on the Senate side as well, in addition to that.
Yeah, in the Senate side, so Leader Brady had stepped down just before the lame duck session. So the new Senate Republican leader is Dan McConkey. So he has taken over in that position already. Has assembled his leadership team. Actually, retiring Senator Dale Ryder from the Mattoon area is becoming his chief of staff. So he will still be around and has lots of years of experience in both the House and the Senate. So he's putting his leadership team together. And Senator Harmon still remains Senate President, and Leader Durkin remains leader in the House Republican Caucus in the House. So not too much change in those two positions, but quite a bit of shifting around.
So, Allison, beyond obviously leadership changes, we know that legislation is already starting to be proposed, and I think from what I saw, in dialogue with you earlier, we're already dealing with dozens of education bills that are being brought forward. And I'm sure we'll have opportunities down the road to speak to many of those. But one, I think here that has gained quite a bit of attention, particularly when you look at it in conjunction with, the bills that were passed during the lame duck session, was the possibility of having prohibition around SROs. So can you speak to that just a little bit? Because I think it's important for people to understand that there's been a little bit of history over time with this type of legislation that will be some helpful context for our members.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the bills, so far there's 80 plus bills that have been filed in the House already, just in the first, few days, because they were still in on Wednesday and Thursday. So they were still, doing work on both days of last week. So a lot of those bills, again, just to keep in mind, were bills that were filed last January. And because of COVID, because everything got shut down, and because the General Assembly really only met last session for about 3 days in May to wrap everything up, that most legislators are just kind of putting out the same bills that they had last year that just never got a chance to be heard at all. So one in particular was House Bill 29 from Representative Ann Stauber Murray from the Naperville area. So I think Brian and I both had quite a few phone calls and emails about this, just due to social media, and I'm not sure how else it got out there. But basically, the bill would prohibit school resource officers. It would limit law enforcement presence at schools, except for an instance of imminent danger. So essentially prohibiting school resource officers to have a presence in school on a regular basis on a regular day. So as you can imagine, again, the social media firestorm that occurred, lots of phone calls to her district office, and she had committed in the media both. And then I just saw today that the bill has actually been tabled, so it will not be heard. Nothing is ever dead until the last day of session, however, but I'm confident that I think she's not moving forward on this right away. And I think what she has said too in the media, from what I've read, is, she filed the bill. It's the same bill she filed last year. So again, it's just something that didn't ever get a hearing last year because of everything that happened. And I think people just kind of laid out the same bills that they had at the beginning of 2020 for 2021. So she had said that because the criminal justice package passed during the lame duck session, that she was not planning on moving that bill. So, other people can still file the same bill, and we will obviously keep our eye on it. But I think for the most part, for the time being anyway, that bill in particular is being held and it's being tabled. So nothing to worry about at the most immediate time right now.
Well, obviously, for our members, one of the most logical questions that comes up, at least where IPA is concerned, what is our position on legislation like that? And traditionally, it's been where SROs is concerned, is that it's a local decision to make that call. And so, if there were to be a prohibition, obviously we wouldn't be supportive of that, just because we feel like that takes the responsibility out of the hands of the local governing body, the board, the superintendent, school leadership there, to make that call with the support of the local community to decide what is best for the kids in that school. So we'll see if we see anything move forward like that, but I would guess, at least at this juncture, that we will have the opportunity to at least move on for now. So, of course, we got quite a bit of time here already that we're into this. A lot of ground to cover. We've got a few more issues I want to be sure that we get an opportunity to get to. So a couple other maybe not non-related legislative session items, Brian, that might be of interest for folks. One is there's a pretty important free speech case that's in front of the U.S. Supreme Court right now that I know that we've been contacted about. So would you mind getting us up to speed on that?
Absolutely. The U.S. Supreme Court, which hasn't heard a student free speech case in quite a while. This one is called BL versus Mahanoy Area School District. And in a nutshell, it involves a young woman who didn't make the varsity cheerleading team and said some pretty unflattering things about the school and the school's athletics on Snapchat, and was kicked off of the junior varsity cheerleading team for 1 year. And she challenged this in the federal district court, in the federal court of appeals, and the federal court of appeals actually sided with her and said that the Tinker standard, which we're all used to, doesn't apply to off-campus speech. So school districts essentially would not be able to discipline students for any kind of speech that takes place truly off campus, and that creates a contradiction among the federal courts. So the U.S. Supreme Court will hear this case. I don't know the timing of it. These things take a long time. This is actually a 2017 court case that is going to be heard this term by the Supreme Court. So maybe somewhere towards the middle of 2021, we'll have a decision on that.
Well, that's going to be interesting, I'm sure, for an attorney such as yourself, Brian, that has you on the edge of your seat, I would guess, just to see how that turns out. But, related to student speech and such, I think it's always important for us just to have some reminders around, particularly as there tends to be, when things are hot a little bit politically across the country, kids want to make sure that they have opportunities to have their voice heard. That's been a little bit challenged with the pandemic because a lot of students have been in remote learning or hybrid, which has challenged, their ability to do some of that. But just thought it would be a good reminder, since we're talking about speech issues, to just talk a little bit about, protecting kids' rights related to protests and stuff, even when they're in school. So just kind of curious about any feedback that you have related to that important topic.
Sure. Well, the courts have said that kids being able to express themselves is an important component of education. And we want to make sure that as kids react to the political environment, that we provide a safe place for them to express their viewpoint and focus on safety, focus on making it a positive learning experience for kids, but knowing when to shut down that speech if it becomes dangerous or becomes a material and substantial disruption to the educational environment.
Well, and what I've learned in these situations is it's always indicative, I think, for school leaders to be proactive in these situations, to understand, what your kids are working through and processing and talking about with each other, and figuring out how to provide them the opportunity to have voice, but to do it in a way that will not be disruptive to the overall school environment, or as minimal as possible. And typically when school leaders are proactive in those ways and don't try to be overly obstructionist to students having their voice, so that it's done productively rather than destructively, then I think that's an appropriate way to go. So appreciate the feedback with that. So got a couple of just last non-legislative related items, but we do want to put up on your radar. So this past week, I was fortunate to sit in on a meeting with the Illinois Department of Public Health and the Illinois State Board of Education. The meeting was run by our state superintendent, Dr. Ayala, as we just had the opportunity to learn a little bit about the vaccine rollout. And I just know, for who I'm connected with via social media and also seen in the news, that the vaccine is rolling out, that we're in phases kind of depending on where you're at in the state, in either 1A or 1B, 1A being frontline healthcare workers and then those that are the most critically ill and at risk. We get into 1B, it's those individuals at 65 or older. And we also know that educators are part of that. And I do know that some educators, from what I've seen, have already received, the first round of the Moderna vaccine, or are in line to receive a vaccine here in the next couple of weeks. And other places, maybe not be as close to that. But some interesting information that we heard from the Department of Public Health was Dr. Tokar's there from IDPH. We're sharing some things to myself and other management groups as well as the unions. But some things to expect when you do go to a facility that is administering the vaccine, that you've got to be prepared to self-attest, letting them know, if you're a certain age or if you're an actual educator, you may be asked to provide your own ID so that you can verify where you live or that you work in a certain institution. You may be asked about your insurance. You don't expect to be billed for the shot, but it is typical for healthcare facilities to ask for insurance, and that includes pharmacies like CVS or Walgreens that might be giving the vaccine. A couple of things about the vaccines that I think is extremely important, because we want to be sure that we dispel any myths that might be out there related to it. That there's no fetal tissue in these vaccines. There is no mercury in these vaccines. There's no live vaccine in the vaccine. It's CRISPR is the term that I've heard related to the way that it attacks RNA and some other things. I'm trying to go back to my biochemistry days, and it's quite a stretch from some of that terminology. But I'm trying to do, help understand that these vaccines are really safe. Of course, we're not providing them to children, anybody that's under the age of 18, I think, Brian, is what you and I were discussing. But adults are the only ones that are going to be given the opportunity to receive it. But also, Dr. Tokar's was very transparent in saying that you could expect to receive or have some side effects after receiving the vaccine. You can have a low-grade fever. There might be some body aches, but they're just normal, common side effects after vaccines such as this. And from the few people that I've talked to that have had a couple of doses of the vaccine, it's usually after the second vaccine that those. It doesn't mean it couldn't happen after the first, but it's after the second where that's really an issue. The benefits that were shared that I think are important to understand is there's 95% efficacy with after you receive both for both Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines after you receive both shots. I know Johnson & Johnson's got one that's a one shot administration. They're, I think, moving into phase 3 of their tests. So we're a ways away from that one, but we'll see how that works out. But just remember, when we get these vaccines, we protect family, we protect coworkers, and it gets us, further down the road towards herd immunity, which is what we really need in order to fully open things back up so that kids can go back to school as normal, so that we can have activities and athletic events, so that we can go to restaurants and all of that. I mean, I'm so ready for a, prime rib, medium cooked steak right now. I can just about taste it. So anyway, thought I would share some of that information and know that IPA, along with the other management groups, the unions, and the state board, will be sharing out some additional information as we just do what we can to encourage people to take the vaccine. The other thing that I'll mention that IPA is coming out here pretty soon, as we typically do at this time of the year, is our salary survey. This year, we are partnering with Hazard Young and Atia and the ECRA group to help us with the collection of data, the compiling of data, the assessment of that, and then we'll be working with them to get our typical written report out to all of you. It will come in hard copy form, should be by the middle to end of February at the latest. But what we're particularly excited about, due to the skill sets of ECRA and the capacity that they have, we're also going to be able to set up a data portal that will give you the opportunity to interact with the data and input your information and allow for a comparison of where you are with your salary and benefits versus where others are in similar circumstances as you. So be on the lookout for that. We'll share those things with you as they become available, but an exciting expansion of that salary survey service that we've provided for some period of time. So just a couple of other things to be on the lookout for. All right, gang, that is quite a bit of ground to cover, probably one of our longer IPA talks, but grateful to both of you to share out some important information that is, I'm sure, on people's minds, or things that they're going to want to be aware of. But as always, it's good to have Brian Schwartz, Allison Maley with me. Grateful for it, guys.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
All right. Well, just to wrap it up, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. As always, if there's anything IPA can do for you, don't hesitate to give us a call, or you can check us out on the web at www.ilprincipals.org. Take care.